The last thing Walt Cassidy ever said to his daughter was something about the truck needing an oil change. Not "I love you," not "I'm proud of you," not anything she could hold on to later when she needed it most. Just a practical observation on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered the way Walt delivered most things quietly without ceremony, as if the words were a tool he was handing her rather than a goodbye. She didn't know it was a goodbye. You never do. He was 52 years old. He was carrying drywall up a flight of stairs for a client in Garner when his left arm went numb. The paramedics said it was fast. Nora didn't know if that was supposed to make her feel better. She turned the word fast over in her mind for days afterward, and it never became comfort. It just stayed sharp the way certain words do when they are asked to carry more than words can hold. The funeral was 11 people. A pastor who had met Walt Cassidy exactly once and mispronounced his middle name twice during the service. Nora sat in the front pew in a black dress she'd borrowed from a woman she worked with at the Shell station, and she kept her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the plain pine box, and tried to remember something more than the thing about the oil change. She couldn't find it. The memory she needed wasn't there. She kept reaching for it and coming back empty, and eventually she stopped reaching and just sat with the emptiness and let the pastor finish. Leland Cassidy showed up 20 minutes late and stood in the back of the chapel with his arms crossed the way a man stands when he's already calculating what comes next. Nora noticed him but said nothing. She was 19 years old, and she had just buried the only parent she had ever known, and she did not have the energy for whatever Leland was. 3 weeks passed. She went back to work at the Shell station because the rent was still due, and the electricity didn't care that she was grieving. She sorted through Walt's papers at night, sitting on the floor of the apartment with folders spread around her, trying to understand what she had and what she owed and what came after. The lease was in Walt's name. The landlord had already called using the polite voice people use when they want to sound reasonable while doing something unkind. 30 days, he said. Find somewhere else. She did the math more than once. It always came out the same way. $11 an hour, part-time, no credit history, no co-signer. Even the cheapest studio in Garner would eat everything she made. There was no version of the math that worked. She had $47 in her checking account. On a Wednesday afternoon in the third week, she heard the diesel engine before she saw the truck. She was in the back bedroom packing boxes, not because she had anywhere to go, but because movement felt better than stillness when the low, familiar sound came through the window. She crossed to the kitchen and looked out. A flatbed trailer backed slowly into the parking lot. Walt's truck pulling it. Leland's hands on the wheel. His wife, Sybil, sat in the passenger seat with her phone in both hands, not looking up. Nora met him at the door. "What are you doing here?" Leland didn't answer. He stepped past her into the apartment and walked straight to the back room where Walt kept his tools moving with the practiced certainty of a man executing a plan he had already rehearsed in his mind. "Your daddy owed me $4,000, he said from the back room. "I'm collecting." "He never mentioned owing you anything." Well, he did. The rolling toolbox went first loaded onto a dolly, the Milwaukee drill set, the table saw, the welding rig Walt had saved for 2 years to buy, setting aside small amounts every month with the patience of someone who understood that certain things could not be rushed and that patience itself was a form of discipline. Nora watched him make 3 trips to the trailer. Tools first. Then the truck keys off the hook by the kitchen door lifted the way you lift something that belongs to you. Then the kitchen table, which Leland claimed he'd built himself 15 years ago and was simply reclaiming. "You got papers saying otherwise." She didn't. She stood in the living room with her arms wrapped around herself and watched the apartment become unrecognizable. Bare walls, empty corners where things had been. The specific silence of a space that has had something essential removed from it. Leland paused at the door on his last trip out. He looked around the room with the systematic attention of a man checking to make sure he hasn't missed anything. His eyes moved across the shelves, the counters, the windowsill. They landed on the bookshelf beside the kitchen entry on a worn leather Bible sitting between a stack of utility bills and a coffee mug with a chipped rim. He looked at it for a moment. "You can keep your daddy's church stuff," he said. Then he walked out. The flatbed pulled out of the parking lot. The engine sound faded down the street and was gone, and the apartment was so quiet that Nora could hear the refrigerator humming. She sat down on the floor. Not slowly or carefully, her legs simply stopped working the way they were supposed to, and she sat where she was standing in the middle of the stripped living room and stayed there for a long time. She didn't cry. She had already done that in the shower in her car in the parking lot of the Shell station before her shift in the single bathroom stall at the back of the building where she'd let it happen until she ran out. She had cried herself clean, and what was left wasn't grief exactly. It was something harder and quieter, the weight of having nothing left to lose. The refrigerator kept humming. A car passed outside. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. It was past midnight when she finally stood up. She heated water in the microwave. Leland had taken the electric kettle along with everything else and mixed instant coffee in the mug with the chipped rim. She stood at the laminate strip that served as a counter and pulled the Bible toward her. Walt hadn't been a religious man, not in any conventional sense. He didn't go to church. He didn't quote scripture. But he'd kept this Bible on the shelf for as long as Nora could remember, and she had seen him open it sometimes late at night, sitting at the kitchen table with his reading glasses on, turning pages slowly with the focused expression he usually reserved for blueprints or electrical diagrams, like he was looking for specific information. She had never thought to ask him what. She opened it now. The spine cracked softly, years of careful handling having worn a natural give into the binding. The pages were thin and translucent, at the edges worn soft from decades of use. She turned through them slowly, not reading, just feeling the weight and texture of something her father had held repeatedly and deliberately for reasons she would never fully know. Between Psalms and Proverbs, a piece of paper folded twice. She almost missed it. The paper was thin enough to nearly disappear against the page, the folds aligned with the text columns, as if placed by someone who understood exactly how much it needed to not be found by the wrong person. She unfolded it. A deed, stamped by the county clerk's office. The ink was slightly faded but clear. Dated 7 years ago. 2 acres. Lot 14 Miller Creek Road. The name on the deed, Walter James Cassidy. The purchase price, printed in the deliberate type of official documents, was $340. Nora read it 3 times. Her father had owned land. 2 acres of something, somewhere for 7 years, and he had never said a single word about it to anyone. She turned the page. Behind the deed was a second piece of paper, smaller, more worn at the folds, a hand-drawn map in Walt's unmistakable block lettering. Garner to the property, 40 miles north. A town called Ridley circled twice in ballpoint pen, then an arrow pointing east along what he'd labeled Miller Creek Road, and at the end of the arrow, a small X and a notation in his neat hand, Lot 14. She sat with the deed and the map until the coffee went cold. Every Saturday morning for 7 years, Walt Cassidy had kissed her forehead and said he was picking up side work. Every Saturday evening he'd come home, tired sawdust in his hair and dried concrete on his boots, and she had assumed he was hanging cabinets or reframing somebody's garage. The most ordinary explanation. Walt was a man who specialized in the ordinary, who moved through the world quietly and without announcement, and she had never thought to question the ordinary version of things. 360 Saturdays, give or take, every one of them going somewhere she had never known existed. She folded the deed and the map and put them in the inside pocket of her jacket close to her body. She did not sleep for a long time. When she finally did, it was on the mattress on the floor because Leland had moved the frame to get to the toolbox and she hadn't put it back together. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling and thought about 40 miles north in a town called Ridley and what $340 bought at a county tax auction. In the morning, she packed one bag. The Greyhound to Durham cost $19. She bought the ticket at the station counter from a woman who didn't look up when she took the cash. Nora sat in the back of the bus and watched Garner fall away through the window. The storage units and the discount furniture stores and the apartment complexes packed close together, and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not relief and not hope. Something more provisional than either. Something like the feeling just before an answer arrives when you know the question is finally the right one. The county connector bus from Durham dropped her at a gas station on the edge of Ridley at a little past noon. She stood outside with her backpack and looked at the town. One main street, a hardware store with a hand-painted sign, a diner with a screen door propped open, a Baptist church set back from the road behind a row of old oaks, a post office in a building that had been at least two other things before it became a post office. The kind of town that has never tried to be anything other than what it is, which gives it a quiet, settled confidence. A man sitting on a bench outside the diner watched her for a moment, then went back to his newspaper. She was a stranger. In a town this size, that was information enough. The hardware store was the only building with an open sign, and what appeared to be air conditioning, a window unit mounted above the door, humming with effort in the afternoon heat. She pushed the door open and stepped into the cool interior. The smell hit her first. Lumber and machine oil and something metallic and clean. Tall shelving units running the length of the store bins of hardware, sorted by size coils of rope and extension cord hanging from wooden pegs. A store that knows exactly what it is and has no interest in being anything else. A man stood behind the counter at the far end. He was in his 60s, thick through the shoulders, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a newspaper folded open on the counter in front of him. His canvas apron was worn at the pockets. The name embroidered on the chest read, Earl. He looked up when she came in. "Help you find something." "I'm looking for Miller Creek Road," Nora said. "Do you know where it is?" Earl put his newspaper down. He took off his reading glasses and set them carefully on the counter. He looked at her with the focused attention of someone working through a calculation, not unfriendly but deliberate, measuring something. "You waltz girl," he said. The words landed somewhere below her sternum. "You knew him." "Knew him for 7 years, Earl said. "Came in every Saturday morning like clockwork. First man here most days, sometimes before I'd finished my first cup." He paused. "I heard he passed. I'm real sorry." "Thank you." She swallowed. "I found a deed. Land on Miller Creek Road. I didn't know he owned anything out here." Earl nodded slowly. Something moved across his face, not surprise, because he clearly wasn't surprised, but something adjacent to it. Recognition. The look of a man who has been waiting for something to arrive and is watching it come through the door. "Miller Creek is about 4 miles east," he said. "Take this road out of town, past the church, hang a left at the fork. Gravel road goes another 2 miles. Lot 14 is on the right. You'll see a break in the tree line." "What's out there?" Earl looked at her for a long time. Long enough that it became deliberate, long enough that she understood he was choosing his words with the same care a man uses when he has been waiting to speak them. "I think you ought to go see for yourself," he said. She walked 4 miles in sneakers with soles wearing thin the April afternoon, warm enough that she shed her jacket after the first mile and tied it around her waist. The dogwoods were blooming along the roadside, white clusters against new green, the early spring beauty of the Carolina Piedmont that manages to be extravagant without ever calling attention to itself. She passed the Baptist church. An older woman watering flowers along the front walk looked up and gave a small wave. Nora waved back without stopping. She found the fork and turned left onto the gravel road. It narrowed almost immediately, the trees pressing in from both sides until they formed a canopy that filtered the afternoon light into something greenish and slow. The sound of her footsteps changed on the gravel. She counted mailboxes out of habit. There were only 2 on the entire road. Both rusted, both for lots that looked long abandoned. The driveways grown over the mailbox flags, locked down by decades of disuse. She walked. Her feet ached. The backpack pressed into her shoulders. She was thinking about distance and wondering if Earl had miscounted when she saw a break in the tree line on the right side of the road. Not a driveway exactly. A dirt path just wide enough for a truck worn into the earth by years of tires turning in from the gravel. The ruts were beginning to fill back in with grass. 3 weeks of no one driving through. She turned onto the path. It curved through a stand of old pines tall enough that their canopy blocked the sky almost entirely. In the filtered dark beneath them, she could smell resin and soil and the coolness of undisturbed forest. She walked the curve and counted her steps, 60, 70, 80, and then the trees opened. She stopped. In the middle of the clearing, on a slight rise in the land, sat a structure. Not a ruin, not a shack, not the forgotten remnant of something that used to be. A house. Small, unfinished in places, still clearly a work in progress, but a house. Real lumber, the kind with weight and grain. The roof was complete dark shingles laid in straight lines that caught the afternoon light and held it. 3 of the 4 walls were sheathed in plywood, solid and square. The fourth, the south-facing wall, was finished in clapboard siding painted a pale blue, the blue of a clear sky at 7 in the morning, just before the light fully commits to the day. The front had a frame porch with no railing and no steps, just raw 2x6 lumber suspended 3 feet off the ground waiting. Nora walked toward it. Her legs felt uncertain beneath her, not weak, but recalibrating the way your body adjusts when the ground is shifted in a way you didn't anticipate. She tried the front door, a piece of plywood with a padlock, solid and new-looking. She walked around the side of the house, through knee-high grass, past a stack of lumber covered with a blue tarp, past a wheelbarrow turned upside down. The grass along the side had been worn down by foot traffic, a path formed not from a single decision, but from hundreds of repetitions. Someone had walked this route regularly and for a very long time. At the back, a window, no glass yet, a sheet of plastic stapled to the frame from the inside, the edges lifting slightly in the faint breeze. She peeled it back and looked through. One room completely finished. Drywall painted a soft white, even and smooth, the work of someone who had taken their time and redone what wasn't right. A wood floor, tongue and groove pine, sanded to a finish that caught the light and turned it warm. A window on the east wall with actual glass in it, looking out toward where the morning sun would come through the trees. Against the wall, a cot with a folded wool blanket on top. A plastic storage bin with a camp stove sitting on its lid. A lantern. And on the wall beside the east window, a small wooden shelf mounted at a height that seemed specific, not an afterthought, but a decision made by someone thinking carefully about who would be reaching for it. Her father had slept in this room. Every Saturday after a day of building, he had slept in the room he was building for someone else. And standing there with her hands on the window frame, looking at the careful way the corners of the drywall had been taped at the shelf, mounted at exactly her height at the east-facing window, positioned to catch the first light of morning, Nora knew with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic who he had been building it for. She climbed through the window. The room smelled like sawdust and pine resin, and something fainter underneath, Old Spice and machine oil, the scent of her father's work jacket, the smell she had associated with him since she was small enough to be carried. It hit her harder than she expected. She stood in the middle of the finished room with her hands at her sides and pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. After a moment, she moved. She touched the wall seams, running her fingertips along the tape lines smooth. No ridges, the work of someone who had redone them until they were right. She crossed to the east window and stood in the light coming through it, and from here she could see the clearing and the tree line and the sky above the pines. She had said it once years ago that she wanted to wake up with the sun. Offhand, the way you say things when you're a child and someone is listening more carefully than you know. He had written it down somewhere. She could feel it. She knelt beside the cot and looked under it. A spiral-bound composition notebook, the kind used for job notes and materials, lists its cover stained with coffee rings and the ghost of a paint handprint on the lower right corner. She pulled it out, held it. Not heavy, but substantial, the way something becomes substantial when it contains more than its physical mass. She opened it to the first page. Walt's handwriting. Block letters, all capitals, the way he always wrote. The way he'd written on her birthday cards every year, always signed the same way. The way he'd written the grocery lists he left on the kitchen counter, and the notes he'd tucked into her lunch bag when she was in middle school. Small practical reminders that somehow always managed to say something else beneath the practical. Nora's house. Started April 2019. She turned the page. Measurements. Materials lists. Costs broken down to the penny in the careful accounting of a man who knew what every dollar was worth because he had earned every dollar with his body. Cedar siding, $87. Roofing nails, $12. Window unit for the east bedroom, $41 purchased used from a man in Ridley whose address was noted in the margin. Concrete for the footings, lumber for the framing. The cost of the well pump and the permits and every nail and every tube of caulk, all of it recorded with the attention of someone who understood that the details were not beside the point. The details were the point. And between the building notes scattered throughout the pages, like they had come to him while his hands were occupied and his mind was free messages to her, she turned pages slowly. Page 4. Nora's room east window. She always said she wanted to wake up with the sun. The window unit was 41, but I'll upgrade when the budget allows. She deserves real glass, not plastic sheeting. Page 7. Check with May about the water heater in her garage. Franklin's old unit. Offer to trade fix her porch railing in exchange. Don't wait too long. May won't ask twice, but she won't offer again either. Page 11. Porch will face south, big enough for 2 chairs. She'll want a dog someday. She's always wanted one. The apartment didn't allow it, and I couldn't fight that battle, and the rent battle at the same time. Maybe the dog comes first. Maybe she finds the dog before she finds the house. Either way. Page 14. Plumbing rough-in complete. Took 3 weekends longer than planned because I redid the bathroom drain slope twice. Dad used to say, measure twice, cut once. I say measure 3 times and sleep on it. Better slow and right than fast and wrong. Page 19. Kitchen almost framed. Small, but she doesn't need big. She needs hers. There's a difference between a kitchen that's big and a kitchen that belongs to you. She sat on her father's cot and read until the light through the east window turned gold, then orange, then faded to the blue-gray of early evening. She had no flashlight. Her phone battery was at 11%. She had $47 a backpack with 3 days of clothes, a deed to 2 acres of land, and a composition notebook filled with her father's voice. She pulled the wool blanket around her shoulders. It smelled like him. Outside, something moved in the grass. Soft, careful movement, the kind that happens when something is assessing a situation before committing to it. Then a shape appeared at the back window at the gap, where she'd peeled the plastic sheeting back to climb in. A dog. Medium-sized coat, a mix of brown and white, that had probably been cleaner once, and might be again with time and attention. One ear torn at the tip, healed without care. Ribs showing through the matted fur with the clarity of an animal that has been surviving rather than living. It stood at the window and looked at her with dark, cautious eyes, not afraid exactly, but carefully weighing the situation with the intelligence of something that has learned that trust is a resource to be spent carefully. Nora didn't move. The dog stayed. After a long moment, it climbed through the window with a practiced ease that said it had done this before, knew the gap in the plastic sheeting, knew the height of the sill. It walked 3 careful circles in the far corner of the room and lay down with its chin on its forepaws. She watched it settle. "You knew him too," she said. The dog blinked once and closed its eyes. She opened the notebook again and held it close in the fading light, looking for the last entry. She found it near the back page 23. The handwriting was the same careful block letters, but she could see something in it now, a tiredness perhaps, or just the economy of a man writing late at a camp stove's light after a long day. Almost done. Give it to her on her 21st. She'll fight me on it. She'll say it's too much. She's always done that, acted like good things weren't meant for her, like she has to earn more than other people just to justify wanting what she wants. I don't know where she got that. Maybe from watching me. I should have done better at showing her, but she needs to know. She needs to know I saw her. Every single day that I saw her. The house is just the way I could think to say it without making it into a speech, and she would have hated the speech. She hates speeches. She gets that from me too. Nora closed the notebook. She held it against her chest in the dark room her father had built with his own hands in the house he had driven 40 miles every Saturday morning to work on in secret, and she sat with the weight of it. The weight of being seen, the weight of being loved in a language so quiet and so patient and so particular to one person that she had been standing inside it her entire life without recognizing it as a language at all. She was not going to fall apart now, not here. This room was not built for falling apart. She could feel that in the walls and the careful taping of the drywall seams in the wood floor, sanded to smoothness by a man who believed that what you build for the people you love should be smooth enough that they never catch on anything. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at the east window. Through it, the first stars were appearing above the pines. More stars than she had ever seen from the apartment in Garner, where the light from the parking lot and the gas station and the strip mall 3 blocks away had kept the sky perpetually half lit. Here the sky was fully dark and fully itself, and the stars were extraordinary. She reached into her backpack and found the last granola bar she'd been rationing since Durham. She broke it in half without thinking about it and set one half on the floor near the dog. The dog looked at it, looked at her, then ate it in 2 bites and settled back down. She ate the other half and lay back on the cot with the blanket pulled up and the notebook resting on her chest, and the dog in the corner, and the stars through the east window, and the smell of her father in the wool. She had $47. She had a backpack and a deed and a notebook filled with intentions, in a finished room in an unfinished house, in a clearing 40 miles north of an apartment she no longer had any right to. She had less than she had ever had. The dog breathed steadily in the corner. She closed her eyes. The east window held the dark. The stars moved through it with the slow patience of things that have been doing what they do for a very long time and intend to continue. The silence was deep enough to have weight to press against her in a way that felt for the first time in 3 weeks less like grief and more like something that could be lived in. Her father had been building her a place to land. She had landed. She pulled the blanket tighter and let the room hold her, and outside the clearing settled into its night sounds, and the dog breathed and the stars moved and the house stood solid on its slight rise roof. Straight walls, true east window, open to whatever morning was coming. She slept. She woke to sunlight on her face. For 3 seconds she didn't know where she was. Then she felt the wool blanket, smelled the sawdust, heard the silence of a clearing surrounded by pines, and the previous day reassembled itself with the careful inevitability of pieces finding their places. The east window, the cot, the notebook on the shelf where she'd placed it before sleeping, her father's block letters facing outward. The dog was gone. The corner where he'd slept was empty, though the impression of his 3 circles was still visible in the fine dust on the floor. She didn't know when he'd left or how. She sat up and looked at the room in full morning light. It was different with the sun coming through the east window. What had seemed spare and functional in the dimness of evening was something else entirely. Now the walls painted with a care that showed in the evenness of the sheen, the floorboards fitted and finished with the patience of someone who understood that you spend your life closest to a floor, and it should be worthy of that. In the corner, a small shelf held 3 cans of beans, a box of matches, and a jar of peanut butter with the lid screwed down tight. Her father had stocked the room like he expected someone to arrive with nothing. She ate peanut butter on her fingers and drank water from a jug she found under the camp stove. Then she went to see what Walt had built. The house was bigger than it appeared from outside. She moved through it slowly, room by room, the way you move through something when you are trying to understand it. 2 bedrooms, the finished one she'd slept in, and a second at the north end, where the framing was complete and insulation had been tucked between the studs with precision, nothing sagging. A bathroom roughed in with PVC pipes stubbed up through the subfloor. The toilet flange set in concrete. A toilet sitting unconnected in the middle of the room, waiting for the day someone finished the job. A kitchen with hand-built pine cabinets sanded smooth and sealed. Each door hung straight, each hinge seated flush. The work of someone who had understood that no one was watching and had done it right anyway. The wiring was finished. She found the breaker panel on the back wall and flipped the main breaker. Somewhere in the house, a light came on, faint and warm, visible through the gap under the kitchen door, and the low hum of electricity moving through a completed system began beneath everything like a second heartbeat. Walt had run the cables neat, clipped to the studs at even intervals. He used to say that sloppy electrical work was the one kind of sloppy that had the authority to kill you, and that anything with that kind of authority deserved your full respect. Cold water came from the well pump when she turned the kitchen faucet. Brown for 10 seconds, then clear and cold. No hot water yet, the heater hookup was ready, gas line and vent pipe in place, but the unit itself was absent. She stood at the kitchen sink and looked out the window over it. Walt had placed this window exactly there at exactly that height because he knew she would stand at a kitchen sink and want something to look at. She was still reading the notebook when she heard the truck. An old green pickup moving slowly up the dirt path, the careful pace of a driver not entirely sure she had the right place. It stopped at the edge of the clearing. A woman got out. She was in her 70s, small silver hair cut short and practical, a flannel shirt tucked into jeans, work boots that had been through serious seasons. She stood by the truck and looked at the house with an expression that mixed familiarity with something more complicated, then looked at Nora. "Well," she said, "I was wondering when you'd show up." Her name was May Purcell. She lived 2 miles east, had lived there for 43 years. She had been watching the property since Walt stopped appearing 3 weeks ago and had known immediately that something was wrong. She'd heard about the death through Earl and had been waiting for Nora with the patient certainty of someone who understood that things arrive when they're ready and not before. She had known Walt for 7 years, had seen the lumber delivery start in the second year, the roof going up in the third, had finally walked over one morning with a thermos of coffee and introduced herself because in May Purcell's experience, the direct approach saved everyone a significant amount of time. He was shy about it at first, she said. They were standing on the unfinished porch together looking out at the clearing. Didn't want to explain, but after a while he told me. She paused. He said his daughter had been through some rough years after her mother left. Said he wanted her to have a place that was hers. Not rented, not borrowed, hers. Another pause. He was going to give it to you on your 21st birthday. Drive you up, hand you the key, stand back and watch. He didn't make it, Nora said. No, May said. He didn't. They stood with that for a moment. Come have breakfast, May said. Real breakfast, not whatever's in those cans. May's house was a quarter-mile off the main gravel road, a white clapboard farmhouse with a porch that wrapped 3 sides and a kitchen that smelled like coffee and bacon and something baking. She put a plate in front of Nora without asking, scrambled eggs toast, 2 strips of bacon orange juice. Nora ate with the focused attention of someone whose body had been running on adrenaline and granola bars and was only now registering what it had been missing. Between bites, she asked questions. May answered them with the directness of someone who had decided that the truth was the only useful gift she had to give. The land had come from a county tax auction. The previous owner had died without heirs, the taxes had gone unpaid for 3 years, and the county had wanted it off their books. Listed as a hunting parcel with a condemned structure, an old hunting cabin from the 1950s that had rotted through to its foundation. Walt had bought it for $340 and spent the first 2 weekends tearing the old structure down to the slab. Then he'd started over, built everything new. He never told anyone, Nora said. He told me and he told Earl because he couldn't build without Earl's materials, May said. That was it. He was a proud man, not the bad kind of proud. The kind where he didn't want to say something until it was done. That afternoon, Earl gave her the job. Mornings 7 to noon, stocking shelves and managing inventory, and helping customers find what they needed. $12 an hour, materials at cost. He explained it the way he explained everything without ceremony, just the facts in the order that mattered. She asked him why. He told her about Walt paying full price for 7 years, turning down every discount Earl offered, saying he wanted to earn it. Least I can do, Earl said, is make sure his daughter has the same chance. She started Monday. The work suited her, physical enough that her hands stayed busy and her mind could work at its own pace. She unloaded pallets of lumber, sorted hardware bins, swept the concrete floor twice a day, helped customers find the things they weren't sure how to ask for. Earl showed her the system once and trusted her to figure the rest out, the kind of trust that feels like respect. By Wednesday, she knew where everything was, from the finished nails to the PVC compression fittings to a specialty drawer of hinges that nobody ever bought but Earl kept because someday somebody would need exactly one of them. Afternoon she built. The bathroom first. Walt had run the pipes and set the toilet flange, but nothing was connected. She watched instructional videos on her phone, borrowed tools from Earl, and spent 4 hours on her back in the crawl space, working PVC joints with primer and solvent cement. The first joint leaked. She cut it out and redid it. The second fitting she glued backwards, realized it during the dry fit before the cement set, and had to saw through the pipe and start that section over. The third time, the joints were clean and tight, and when she flushed the toilet for the first time, and the water went exactly where it was supposed to go, she sat down on the bathroom floor and laughed until the dog, who had come back the second morning and had not left again, tilted his head in the doorway with the expression of an animal, reassessing the judgment of its chosen companion. "Running water," she told him. "That is not nothing." He had returned without ceremony, simply appeared at the edge of the clearing as she was walking back from May's fallen into step beside her, and had not left again. She had found the lean-to at the far edge of the clearing, plywood walls, tarp roof, a cedar board floor. Walt had cut and fit and understood from May that Walt had built it for exactly this dog had been leaving food out every Saturday for 2 years, had named him Ranger and referred to him in the notebook as the best assistant he ever had. She left food out every morning. Ranger ate it and then followed her through the day with the settled devotion of an animal that has found what it was looking for. 3 weeks into the job, May came by with the water heater. Walt had noted it on page 7 of the notebook, a reference to May's late husband Franklin's old unit sitting unused in her garage. Nora had reread the page twice before working up the nerve to ask. May had listened to approximately the first 12 words and then stood up from her porch chair and said, "Come on." 40-gallon gas unit. Franklin had installed it in 2009, and they'd switched to electric 2 years later. It had been in the garage under a tarp since then. May and Nora loaded it into the truck bed together, the weight considerable, the maneuvering awkward, both of them too stubborn to say so. "Your daddy was going to trade me for it," May said, leaning against the truck while Nora wrestled the unit through the front door opening. "Fix my porch railing in exchange. He never got around to it." "I'll fix your railing." "I know you will." A pause. "I'm not in a rush." Installing the water heater took 3 days. Earl walked her through the gas fitting over the phone patient, and specific, making her describe every connection back to him before moving to the next step. He made her check every joint with soapy water before she lit the pilot check. Wait check, again, wait longer. When no bubbles appeared on the third check, he said, "Go ahead," and she struck the lighter with hands that were steadier than she expected. The first hot shower in her own house, standing in the unfinished bathroom with exposed studs and a plastic curtain hung from a length of wire, she stood under the water until it began to cool and then stood in it a little longer. She had been taking cold showers from the well for 3 weeks. The hot water on her shoulders and the back of her neck was not just comfort. It was evidence. Evidence that a thing could be broken and then fixed. That the gap between what was and what should be was crossable if you were willing to do the work. She dried off and stood in front of the thrift store mirror she'd hung above the bathroom sink, steam clearing on the glass, her own face emerging. She looked like her father. She had always known it, but it came to her more directly lately without his presence to mediate it. The same jaw, the same way of standing with her weight shifted forward and her hands at her sides. The same expression when she was working something out, focused and quiet and giving nothing away. She went back to work. The second bedroom got its drywall. Earl taught her how to tape and mud the joints, how to sand them smooth without leaving ridges that would show under paint. Her first wall was rough. Her fifth looked professional. She found blue tile at a salvage yard Earl knew 40 cents a square foot enough for the bathroom floor, matching the pattern Walt had sketched on page 17. She spent an entire Saturday on her knees laying tile in that pattern, and when it was done, she stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long time. The kitchen got a butcher block counter. Earl sold it at cost. She sanded it, sealed it with 3 coats of mineral oil, mounted it on the cabinets Walt had built. When she stood at the sink and ran water and looked out the window at the trees, she could feel how close it was. How close to done. She wrote in the notebook every evening, her handwriting next to Walt's. Page 24, 25, 26. Her entries growing longer and more specific as the weeks went on. She found herself writing to him the way he had written to her, not a formal letter, but a running account. A conversation kept open by one party, past the point where the other could answer. On a Thursday in late May, 3 weeks after Nora had mailed a letter to the county attorney confirming her ownership of the property, she heard the diesel engine. She was on a ladder painting trim around the front window, the afternoon dry, and good for it. She had been up since 6, and the east wall was almost finished, when the sound came up the gravel road, low the specific register of a diesel she had known since childhood. Walt's truck. Leland's truck now. It came up the dirt path and stopped at the edge of the clearing. Leland got out. Behind him, a second man emerged from the passenger side, a tie loosened at the collar, a briefcase shoes wrong for the terrain. A man who did not belong in this particular patch of North Carolina woodland. Leland looked at the house. His expression moved through surprise, then calculation, then something closer to recognition taking in the roof. The clapboard siding, the fresh paint on the trim, the porch. Then he looked at Nora on the ladder. What the hell is this? She came down, set the paintbrush across the open can, wiped her hands on her jeans and waited. It's my house, she said. Your house. He said it the way you repeat something you're deciding how to challenge. Walt built this. Walt started it. I'm finishing it. On what land? His land. Bought and paid for. I have the deed. Something shifted in Leland's face, the particular recalculation of a man whose assumptions have just been complicated. He turned slightly, and the man with the briefcase came forward and introduced himself as Hartwell, and his voice carried the practiced precision of someone accustomed to making information sound weightier than it sometimes is. Walt had not been competent, Hartwell said, to establish an independent will without family witness. As Walt's surviving sibling Leland held a legitimate claim to the estate under North Carolina intestate law. The property had been purchased during a period when Nora was a minor. Hartwell opened the briefcase and produced a folder and set it on the hood of the truck with the careful placement of a man presenting evidence. You have 30 days to respond. Nora looked at the folder, looked at Leland, who was looking at the house again, at the walls and the roof and the porch with its still missing railing. Something beneath the calculation was moving across his face when he looked at it. Something she filed away. He never told me, Leland said, and his voice had lost some of its prepared quality, had become something more unguarded. We were brothers. He should have told me. You took everything he had, Nora said. You left me with a Bible. He didn't answer that. He nodded once at Hartwell, and they got back in the truck and drove away. And the clearing was quiet again, except for the sound of the engine fading down the gravel road. Nora stood with her hands at her sides and felt them trembling. Not from fear, from the physical response of the body to a threat that was real and documented and backed by someone in a tie with a briefcase. She clenched her hands and breathed and waited for the trembling to stop. Ranger pressed his body against her leg. She called Earl that evening from May's porch where the signal was better. Earl listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. There's something you need to know, he said. Bet Marsh had been a civil attorney for 31 years, the only one practicing within 15 miles of Ridley, and she operated out of a 2-room office above the hardware store in an arrangement that had been in place for 28 years of marriage. Hartwell had called her office 2 days earlier, requesting a review of county property records before filing. The name Cassidy in connection with Miller Creek Road had come back to Earl within hours. What Betty found in the county records was a will notarized, witnessed by Earl and Betty themselves, filed with the county clerk's office 4 months before Walt died. Clear language, clear beneficiary. The deed stood in Walt's name individually. No co-owner, no encumbrance. The will was airtight, and Hartwell almost certainly knew it. But Bet had found something else. She needs to see you, Earl said. Can you come by before opening tomorrow? Bet Marsh was a small woman with the precise posture of someone who had learned early that presence is something you build rather than inherit. She had a folder on the counter when Nora arrived, and she opened it without preamble. A promissory note, handwritten, signed by both Walter James Cassidy and Leland Ray Cassidy. Dated April 2019, the same month Walt had bought the first load of lumber for the house. Amount $4,000. Lender Walter. Borrower Leland. Nora looked at it for a long time. Walt lent him the money, she said. In April of 2019, which was money Walt had been setting aside for materials. Bet's voice was careful and even. Leland never repaid it, not a cent. A pause. I don't know if Leland ever intended to, but I know he knew the truth of who owed whom when he walked into your apartment and took your father's tools. $4,000. The number Leland had used as justification. Not a debt Walt had carried, a debt Leland had carried and inverted and used like a crowbar. Nora set the paper down. Your father knew Leland had done this, Bet said quietly, and he let it go, because that was Walt. He would rather absorb the loss than make it a confrontation. He would rather keep building than stop to fight. She looked at Nora directly. I will not be proceeding as Hartwell's consulting attorney. The will is valid, the deed is clean, and I've communicated this to his office. The case is not viable, and he knows it. She slid the folder across the counter. Keep that, she said. Nora walked back to the property that afternoon with the folder in her backpack 4 miles on the familiar gravel road. She walked and thought about her father, about the kind of strength it takes to be taken from and choose not to fight it. Whether that was wisdom or resignation or love, or something that didn't have a clean name. She thought about it without resolution, which felt honest. Some things don't resolve, they just get carried differently over time. Word traveled in the way words travel through small towns, moving through the hardware store counter, in the diner booth, in the pew at the Baptist church, in the front porch conversation at the end of a working day. People began showing up. Theron came first, a large man in his mid-40s with hands scarred from decades of pipework. He had met Walt 8 years ago when Walt showed up one weekend and spent 2 days helping him frame a garage addition without being asked and without accepting payment. He had heard what Nora was doing on Miller Creek Road. He inspected every joint she'd made, found 2 spots that needed reinforcement, confirmed 3 places where Walt's original work was better than what Theron saw in new professional construction. Your daddy ran these drain lines at a better slope than most licensed plumbers manage, he said from under the kitchen sink. He checked the fall twice minimum. You can tell by the way the pipe is cut. He came out and wiped his hands on a rag and stood looking at the kitchen. Love built into copper pipe. I don't know how else to say it. She tried to pay him. He refused with the finality of someone who has already decided and doesn't need to discuss it further. He said if she wanted to repay him, she could help Earl's wife with her garden in the fall. She said she would. Clem came the following Saturday, 70 years old, retired from 30 years of electrical work, still moving with the alert precision of a man whose trade had taught him that carelessness has consequences. He went through the panel switch by switch, tested circuits, replaced one breaker rated too low for the kitchen circuit. 20 minutes of work. He stayed an hour and a half drinking coffee and talking. Walt had bought wire from Clem at a garage sale 6 years ago. $50 for everything Clem had. 12 gauge, 14 gauge, old 10 gauge he'd been planning to throw out. Clem had assumed Walt was reselling it. He paid me $50, Clem said, looking at the panel. And I've been thinking about it since. Because that wire is in these walls right now. Those circuits I just checked, that's the wire from my garage. He looked at the kitchen. I always wondered where it went. Women from the Baptist church came with curtains. White cotton handmade with blue trim that Nora had not specified and had not needed to. The woman who brought them, silver-haired and matter-of-fact, said only that Earl had described the east window and she had a sense for what it wanted. The curtains fit as if they'd been measured. Each person who came brought something. Tools, materials, labor stories. Every story was a fragment of a life Nora hadn't known her father was living his Saturday life. his quiet parallel existence as a man moving through a community he'd helped without announcement. She had thought she knew Walt Cassidy. She had known the version who came home on Saturday evenings with sawdust in his hair, tired and quiet, eating dinner and going to bed at 9. She had not known the man these people knew. She was meeting him now through them in the way you sometimes meet a person more completely after they are gone than you ever managed while they were present. She wrote in the notebook every evening, her handwriting next to his, her pages numbered from where his stopped. The entries lengthened as the weeks went on. She found herself writing to him the way he had written to her, running account conversation kept open by one party past the point where the other could answer. She was on page 27 when she found the pocket. She had read the notebook through at least a dozen times and missed it every time. A small slit in the back cover, cut into the cardboard binding, with a blade nearly invisible unless you pressed and felt the slight give of something behind the surface. She found it on a night in early June, turning the back cover over in her hands. She pressed. Something shifted behind the cardboard. She worked her fingers into the slit. 2 envelopes. Old, they're white, gone slightly yellow with time. No address on either. Just one word on each in handwriting she didn't recognize, smaller than Walt's, rounder, more careful. The handwriting of someone taking time with every letter. The same word on both: Walter. Not Walt. Walter. Nobody called her father Walter. She held both envelopes for a long time. Ranger lay at the foot of her bed watching her with the patient attention he brought to everything she did. The lantern cast its warm circle. Outside, the early June night was warm and the insects had started in the grass. She opened the older envelope first. The paper inside was thin-lined, torn from a legal pad. The date at the top, 11 years ago. Walter, I know you won't write back. I know you're angry and you have every right. But I need you to know why I left. Because Nora deserves the truth even if she never hears it from me. Her name. In a letter she had never seen. In a hand she had never known. She read without stopping. The diagnosis had come in February, the year Nora was 3 years old. Multiple system atrophy. A neurological disease, progressive, no treatment beyond management, no cure. The neurologist had given a rough timeline, 10 good years roughly before the decline became significant, before the body began its systematic withdrawal of cooperation. The woman writing this letter had been 27 years old. She had a 3-year-old daughter who needed to be carried and chased and held steady when she was scared. She had looked at the math of the years ahead and made a decision. I saw my own mother go through the same thing. I watched her disappear by degrees when I was a child. I promised myself I would never put a child through that. I know what you'll say. You'll say she needed me anyway. You'll say sick is better than gone. Maybe you're right. But I couldn't be the mother she deserved, not for long. And I believed that if I left while she was too young to remember me clearly, she would have a better chance at a life that wasn't organized around my dying. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to understand that I left because I loved her, not because I didn't. Leaving was the only thing I could give her that would cost me everything and give her a chance at normal. Let her be angry at me for leaving. Anger is easier to carry than pity. Please don't tell her I'm sick. The name at the bottom was Adeline. Nora sat very still. She read the letter again from the beginning, then a third time. The words were the same each time. They did not soften or harden or become anything other than what they were. Her mother had been 27 years old with a progressive neurological disease and a 3-year-old daughter, and she had chosen disappearance over deterioration. Had chosen to become a wound that could be raged against rather than a wasting that had to be witnessed. 15 years of believing her mother had left because she hadn't wanted to be a mother anymore. 15 years of filling that silence with the worst available interpretation because no other interpretation had ever been offered. Because Walt had kept his promise with the absolute fidelity he brought to every commitment he made. She opened the second envelope. 5 years ago, the handwriting was still careful, but the lines were less even. The paper told the story of a hand that had to work for what the mind asked it to do. Adeline had written slowly, and the effort showed in places where the pen had pressed harder than intended, in the slight wavering of the letters. She was at Greenfield Care Center, Bristol, Virginia, room 214. Her legs had gone the previous year. Her right arm was unreliable. She could still write if she went slowly. She had heard through Walt's Aunt June that Nora had graduated high school, and she had cried for 2 hours. She had heard that Walt was building something, wouldn't say what or where. If it's for Nora, then you are a better parent than I ever was. She deserves a home. She deserves everything. I don't expect to hear from you, but if Nora ever asks about me, you can tell her or don't. That's your choice. I gave up the right to decide when I walked out that door. I love her. I have loved her every single day since I left. Nora put both letters down on the blanket beside her side by side. She looked at them. 11 years ago and 5 years ago. 2 letters written into silence. Neither one expecting an answer, neither one getting one. Walt receiving them, opening them, reading them carefully, placing them back in their envelopes, and sliding them into the hidden pocket in the back cover of the notebook. He had not told her. He had kept the promise Adeline asked him to keep. He had let Nora be angry because Adeline had said the anger was easier to carry. But he had kept the letters. He had not destroyed them. He had not buried them somewhere she would never find. He had put them in the notebook in the house at the end of the path she would eventually follow. He had placed them where they would find her when she was ready, and he had trusted the timing to work itself out. Bristol, Virginia, 3 hours from where she was sitting. Nora looked at the east window. Ranger had shifted and was pressed against her hip, warm and steady, his breathing slow and even. 15 years of anger. It did not dissolve. That was not how 15 years worked. But it had shifted in weight and shape, had moved from one kind of certainty into something more like open water, something that could be moved through rather than only stood against. She looked at the 2 letters lying on the blanket. Then she reached past them and took the notebook from the shelf. She opened it to a blank page in the back. She found the pencil in the supply bin, the same pencil she'd been using for her evening entries. She looked at the blank page for a long moment, and then she wrote, "Dear Adeline, my name is Nora. I'm your daughter. I'm 19 years old, and I'm writing to you from a house my father built in secret over 7 years on 2 acres of land he bought for $340. I found your letters. Both of them. I know about the MSA. I know why you left." She stopped, looked at what she had written, continued. "I'm not going to tell you I understand completely because I don't. I was 3 years old and I grew up believing my mother didn't want me, and that is a thing you carry differently than other things. It gets into the frame of how you see yourself. It changes what you think you're allowed to want. I carried it for a long time, and I'm not going to pretend in this letter that I'm done carrying it, because that would not be the truth, and I don't think you wrote to my father with anything less than the full truth, and I don't think I should write to you with anything less than the same. But I read what you wrote, and I believe you. I believe you left because you love me, even if leaving was the wrong way to show it. Dad died in March. Heart attack. He was 52 years old. He never told me about you. He kept his promise all the way to the end. The house has an east window in my bedroom that faces the morning light, blue tile in the bathroom floor, a porch with 2 chairs facing south, a dog named Ranger who sleeps at the foot of my bed and carries himself like he's been waiting for exactly this arrangement his whole life. I'm okay. I want you to know that. Whatever you were afraid would happen, I'm okay. I'm not ready to visit yet, but I wanted you to know where I am. And I wanted you to know that Dad built me a home the way you hoped he would." She signed it with her name alone, folded it twice, and set it on the shelf beside the notebook. In the morning, she would find an envelope. She would address it to the Greenfield Care Center in Bristol, Virginia, room 214, and she would carry it to the post office on her walk to work, and she would put it in the box and let the metal door close behind it. But that was morning. Tonight she put the pencil down and sat in the room her father had finished first, and held the weight of the 2 letters and the weight of what she had just written. Outside, the insects kept their steady sound. Ranger breathed against her hip. The stars moved in their slow arc above the pine canopy, patient and indifferent and vast, doing what they had always done. She was 19 years old. She was sitting in a house that had been built out of love, so specific and so patient and so quiet that it had taken a deed and a notebook and two hidden letters for her to recognize the full shape of it. She turned down the lantern until it was only a glow, and she lay back and she let the dark of the room hold her, the way the room had been built to hold her. And after a long time, she slept. The letter went into the mailbox on a Tuesday morning in late June, the metal door closing behind it with a sound smaller than what it carried. Nora stood at the post office for a moment after hands still on the door, then turned and walked the 4 miles to Earl's store because there was work to do, and the road was familiar now in a way that had become its own kind of comfort. She thought about what she'd written for most of that walk. The words were gone, committed to paper and sealed and out of her hands, and there was a specific freedom in that, the freedom of a thing that can no longer be reconsidered. She had said what was true and what was incomplete, and she had not pretended to a peace she hadn't yet reached, and that felt like the right way to begin. The morning at Earl's was ordinary in the good way that ordinary mornings had become. She unloaded lumber, reorganized the bin of deck screws a customer had gone through without straightening, swept the concrete floor, helped a man find the right diameter, copper fitting for a repair. He described with the careful imprecision of someone who knows what the problem is, but not what it's called. She found him the fitting. He thanked her and left. Earl came out from the back room at 11:30 with a paper cup of coffee and set it on the counter beside her without comment. This had become a habit between them, not discussed, just established. "Betty heard from Hartwell's office this morning," he said. Nora looked up. "They're withdrawing. Filed the notice with the county this morning. No further action." She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the shelf she was straightening and kept working. Nothing to say that the action hadn't already said. The property was hers in the way it had always been hers, in the way Walt had made it hers 4 months before he died quietly without fanfare, with the specific foresight of a man who understood that some things need to be protected before the moment of protection arrives. "Thank Bet for me," she said. "You can thank her yourself," Earl said. "She's coming for dinner Sunday." July arrived with the steady heat that settles into the Carolina Piedmont and stays. Nora bought a box fan at the salvage yard and installed it in the east window to pull the cooler air up from the tree line at night. Ranger claimed the bathroom tile floor as his preferred afternoon location, appearing there each day with the reliable timing of a creature who has thought carefully about thermal management. She painted the exterior. Earl helped her choose the paint exterior grade formulated for Carolina weather, the humidity and freeze-thaw cycles in years of sun. The color was pale blue, matching as closely as the paint counter system could manage the shade on the south wall Walt had finished before he died. She wanted the house to be of one piece. She wanted someone driving up the dirt path to see a house that had always been intended this way. 6 days on the ladder. She cut in around every window, every corner board, every piece of trim with a brush before rolling the field of each wall. Patient, methodical work, her arms aching by evening, the progress accumulating in the way of slow things done right. On the 6th day, she climbed down the ladder for the last time and walked to the edge of the clearing and looked at the house from a distance. Pale blue on all 4 sides, the dark roof, the porch with its cedar railing catching the afternoon light, 3 solid steps at the front, the east window with its white cotton curtains visible from outside. A house that looked like someone lived there, because someone did. She stood at the edge of the clearing and looked until the light began to shift toward evening, and the pale blue went a shade deeper, and the windows caught the low sun and held it gold. Then she went inside and made dinner on the 2-burner gas range May had found at an estate sale and delivered without advance notice one Saturday morning, knocking on the door and saying only that it had been cleaned and worked fine, and did Nora want it. She had said yes before May finished the sentence. 4 weeks after Leland's visit with Hartwell, after the legal threat had dissolved and the case had been withdrawn, Nora was at the kitchen counter eating lunch when she heard the truck. Not Hartwell's rental car, not a stranger's vehicle. The rust spots on the cab and the dent in the rear panel were the same ones she had memorized in childhood, her father's truck, carrying someone who was not her father. Leland parked at the edge of the clearing and sat in the cab for a full minute before opening the door. She watched through the kitchen window. He got out slowly with the movement of a man whose body had been losing an argument with something for a while. He was thinner. His clothes had been worn too long. He hadn't shaved in a week, and his face carried the exhaustion of someone who has not been sleeping rather than someone who has been working hard. He walked to the porch and stopped at the bottom of the steps that hadn't been there on his last visit. He looked up at her through the screen door. "I'm not here about the property," he said. Nora pushed the screen door open and sat on the top step. She waited. He looked at the ground. He looked at the porch railing at the cedar posts. He looked at the tree line at the lean-to at the far edge of the clearing. Everywhere except at her in the way of a man trying to find the right entry point to something he has never attempted before. "Sybil left," he said. "3 weeks ago. Said I was mean and getting meaner and she wasn't going to wait around for it to get worse." A pause. "She's not wrong." Nora said nothing. She watched him and waited. Leland put his hands in his pockets. The gesture was familiar in a way that took her a moment to place. It was the posture Walt used when he was working something out, standing at the edge of a problem he was turning over. "I've been thinking about your daddy," Leland said. "About what I did after the funeral. The tools, the truck, all of it." He finally looked at her. His eyes were red at the rims. "He didn't owe me that money. I owed him. Have owed him probably for 20 years' money I borrowed and never paid back help I took and never returned. 20 years of calling when I needed something and being unavailable when he did." He stopped, swallowed. "I told myself the 4,000 squared it up. I told myself that enough times that I almost believed it." "I know," Nora said. "I know you know." He held her gaze now, the avoidance gone. "I just never said it out loud. Not to anyone." His voice cracked at the edge of the last word, and he cleared his throat and waited before continuing. "He never said no to me. Not once in my life. Whenever I called, he came. Whenever I needed money, he found it. And I never not once told him thank you." He stopped. Something in his jaw moved. "I should have. That's all. I should have." The clearing was quiet around them. Somewhere in the pines, a bird was calling in short, repeated phrases, the same 3 notes cycling. Ranger came around the corner of the house, looked at Leland with the calm assessment of an animal that has already made its judgment and doesn't need to revise it, then lay down in the grass near the bottom step. "I sold the welding rig," Leland said. "Got 800 for it. I want to give it to you." "Keep it." He stared at her. "Keep the money, Leland. I don't want it." He looked at her with an expression trying to be several things at once and not quite managing any of them. Something that was edging slowly towards seeing her, really seeing her for the first time. "You sound like him," he said. "Turning down money. That same stubborn thing." She didn't answer that. She looked at the gap between the bottom of the porch frame and the ground where there should have been steps, but weren't yet. The stack of lumber she'd measured and marked, but not yet cut, leaning against the house under the overhang. "I need steps," she said. 3 of them. I have the lumber measured, but I haven't fitted the stringers yet." She looked at him. "Do you know how to use a saw?" Leland looked at the gap where the steps weren't, looked at the stack of lumber, looked at Nora on the top of the temporary concrete block she'd been using as a makeshift entry. The expression on his face was one she didn't have words for, exactly the face of a man who has been offered something he had stopped believing was available to him and cannot quite find the right way to receive it. "Yeah," he said. "I know how to use a saw." They worked for 3 hours, and the working was better than the talking had been. Leland measured and cut the stringers with the focused competence of a man whose hands remembered something his life had gotten in the way of. Nora cut the treads to length, checked the angles, test-fitted each piece before committing the screws. They worked in the same silence that Walt had kept on job sites, the productive silence of 2 people communicating through the work rather than around it. Possible only when both parties understand what the task requires and are giving it what it needs. Leland was good with a saw. Better than she'd expected, or maybe exactly as good as she should have expected from a man who had grown up in the same house as Walt Cassidy, taught by the same father with the same tools. The sawdust was familiar, the smell of cut wood in the afternoon heat. When the steps were done solid and level, the stringers seated correctly, the treads fitted with expansion gaps, Leland sat on the bottom one and drank from a bottle of water Nora handed him. He looked up at the house, at the pale blue walls and the straight roof and the cedar railing and the oak front door that was still plywood but wouldn't be for much longer. He built all this himself, Leland said. Most of it, 7 years. He shook his head slowly. I didn't know he had it in him. I mean, I knew he was good with his hands, but this is something else. It's love, Nora said. She said it without preface because it was the accurate word, and she had stopped apologizing for accurate words. The whole thing, 7 years of Saturdays. Every board and every joint and every measurement he triple-checked. It's love in a form that doesn't ask to be recognized. Leland was quiet. He looked at the 3 steps he had just built an hour's work, maybe for a competent carpenter. Set beside 7 years of Saturdays, it was nothing. But he had come back, and he had built something rather than taking something, and she noted the difference without making a ceremony of it. He stood up. I should go. You can come back, she said, if you want to. He nodded once, got in the truck and drove away, and the clearing settled back into its afternoon quiet. That evening she walked to May's. May was on the porch with a book and a glass of iced tea as she was most evenings, and she set the book aside when she saw Nora coming up the gravel drive. Leland came, Nora said, sitting on the steps. I heard the truck. May handed her the glass. What did he want? He said Sybil left him. He said he's been thinking about what he did. She looked at the garden going gold in the evening light. He said my dad never said no to him. Not once. Your daddy never said no to a lot of people, May said quietly. He was that kind of man. He built the steps. May considered this. One set of steps doesn't undo what he did, she said. But it's a step, no pun intended. Nora smiled at that almost. She looked out at May's garden, the rows of vegetables tended with the methodical care of someone who understands that things grow on their own schedule, and your job is preparation and patience. I found letters in the notebook, she said, in a pocket in the back cover. 2 letters from my mother. May went very still the way she did when something mattered. She left because she was sick. MSA neurological disease. She was diagnosed at 27, and she thought she was protecting me by disappearing before I had to watch her go. She wrote to my dad 11 years ago and again 5 years ago. He kept both letters. He kept them in the notebook. May was quiet for a long time. He kept his promise, she said finally. Your mother asked him not to tell you, and he didn't. A pause. But he kept the letters, and he put them where you would find them. I wrote to her, Nora said. She's in a care facility in Virginia, Bristol, 3 hours from here. May looked at her. She might still be there, Nora said. I don't know, it's been 5 years since that second letter. Are you going to go? Nora looked at the garden, at the beanstakes May had cut from the brush at the edge of her property, at the evening light laying itself across the furrows. I sent a letter first, she said. I wanted her to know I was here. I wanted her to know I found the house. She paused. I'm not ready to go yet, but maybe. May reached over and put her hand on Nora's arm briefly with the matter-of-fact warmth of a woman who has long ago stopped performing comfort and simply offers it when it is needed. There's no rush, she said. She waited 15 years. She can wait a little longer. Nora walked home in the warm dark with Ranger beside her, the gravel soft under her sneakers, the night sounds of the Piedmont summer surrounding them. At the house, she sat on the new steps and looked at the property in the dark, the lean-to Walt's wheelbarrow still turned upside down where he'd left it. She kept it upside down. She wasn't ready to move it. The house behind her was almost done. It needed one more thing. The front door she found at the salvage yard the following Saturday, a solid core door oak buried under 2 hollow core interior doors someone had sold by the lot. $35. She could see immediately that the wood under the paint was good. 4 layers of paint over the decades, each applied by someone who hadn't bothered to sand the previous layer the surface built up and obscured. But at the edge where the last painter had missed the wood was tight and straight and honest. She brought it back in the bed of May's truck, strapped flat, and spent a full Saturday with a heat gun and a scraper. Layer by layer. White latex, the most recent. Then a green from an earlier decade. Then a dark red that came off in long curling strips when she got the temperature right. Then bare wood oak, tight-grained, a pattern that ran straight and clean the full length of the door. She sanded it with 3 grits from coarse to fine, applied 3 coats of polyurethane thin, and even sanding lightly between each coat when it dried. The finished door had a warmth to it, the amber depth of oak that has been properly finished and allowed to be what it is. Earl came to help her hang it. He brought a level, a set of new hinges, and a deadbolt from the returns bin. Someone had bought the wrong size and never come back with the receipt, and Earl had set it aside with the same unhurried instinct that had led him to save a can of pale blue paint nearly a year ago. They worked the door together for 45 minutes. Getting the frame shimmied correctly, the hinge mortises, clean the strike plate at the right depth. A door has to swing freely, close squarely, and latch with a single motion, and achieving all 3 requires the kind of patient adjustment that cannot be hurried. Earl shimmied and checked. Nora held the door in position on each test, feeling for the float of it. When it was right, she knew it before either of them said anything. She could feel it in the weight of the door swinging in the clean way the latch found its seat. She closed it from the inside and turned the deadbolt. The sound it made was specific and final and entirely right. The sound of a lock that belongs where it is, in a door that belongs where it is, in a house that belongs to the person standing inside it. She opened it again and stepped out onto the porch. Earl was crouching, examining the threshold seal. He stood up and looked at the house. "That's a house," he said. "That's a real house." "It is." He picked up his tool bag. "Your daddy would have stood there looking at that door frame for 10 minutes, he said, checking the gap, making sure the reveal was consistent on both sides. A pause. He would have found something wrong with it. He absolutely would have. And then he would have fixed it and said it was perfect. She locked the front door with her key, a key that matched no copy she hadn't made herself for a lock she had installed on a door she had refinished for a house that was hers. She put it on the ring beside her key to Earl's store and dropped it in her jacket pocket. 3 weeks after hanging the door, Leland came back. He pulled up on a Saturday morning with cedar boards in the truck bed, found them, he said, at a salvage yard near where he was staying. He'd gone looking specifically. He thought the window boxes could use proper mounting hardware, and also he'd noticed that 2 of the step treads had cupped slightly on the north end, and he wanted to reset the screws. They worked on the porch for most of the afternoon. He was better at detail work than she'd expected, mitered the window box corners cleanly, countersank. Every screw ran his hand along each surface to check for any edge that might catch a hand. He worked without direction once she explained what she wanted, which was the work style of someone who has done enough building to trust the communication between their hands and the task. At some point in the afternoon, he stopped drilling and looked at the house. "How much did he spend?" he asked. "Total. Do you know mid? The notebook tracks it," she said. "About 14,000 over 7 years. Leland was quiet. He looked at the cedar post in the clamp at the house behind it. "That's everything," he said. "After rent and food, that's all he had." "I know. He never bought himself new boots." Leland said it quietly, more to himself than to her. "I saw his boots at the funeral home when they gave me his things. 4 years old at least, resold twice. He wore the same boots for 4 years while he was doing all this." He pulled the trigger and the drill bit sank into cedar, and he didn't say anything else. She hadn't told him about the promissory note. She had thought about it and decided against it, not because he didn't deserve to know, but because he already knew. He had always known. That was what the sleepless weeks and the hollow face and the drive up the dirt path without a lawyer had been about. He didn't need the document. He was carrying the knowledge already. What he needed was not evidence, but a way to begin doing something other than carrying it. When the railing was done, she ran her hand along the top rail from one end to the other. Cedar smooth finished, right the kind of railing you could lean on in the dark and trust it to hold you. May's railing needs fixing, she said. I promised her. He looked at her. I can do that. Saturday. Saturday. He drove away down the dirt path and she watched the truck go. They were not friends. Might never be entirely. There was too much between them and too many years of a dynamic that had calcified before she was old enough to have a say in it. But something had shifted and was continuing to shift in the small, incremental way that things shift when the people involved show up consistently and do the work without making speeches about doing the work. He came back. He built instead of took. She left the door open without ceremony. That was what they had. It was not nothing. The first weekend of September, the three of them fixed May's porch railing. Nora and Leland replacing four rotted posts, re-leveling the top rail, adding cross-bracing underneath where the original construction had trusted confidence over physics. May sat in her chair and supervised, pointing out every imperfection while simultaneously telling them about Franklin building the original railing in 1983. He used pine, May said. I told him pine would rot. He said it would be fine. She watched Leland seat a post. 40 years later. We're using cedar, Nora said. I noticed, smart girl. When the railing was done, May made dinner. Pot roast and mashed potatoes and green beans from the garden served at the kitchen table that had sat in that kitchen for 30 years and knew its purpose. The four of them, Nora, Leland, May, and Ranger, working the probabilities under the table, ate together in the easy way that people eat when they have stopped performing for each other. Leland told a story about a roofing job in Fayetteville that had gone wrong in a thunderstorm. Nora told him about the plumbing joint she'd glued backwards. May told them about the time Franklin had tried to install a ceiling fan and the structural conversation it had with the light fixture. Nobody forced it. The conversation happened the way it does when people stop trying to be anything other than what they are. A young woman finishing her father's house, an older man trying to become someone who deserves to be in the room, a neighbor who had been waiting for both of them to find their way here. After dinner, Nora helped May with the dishes. Through the kitchen window, she could see Leland on the new porch, sitting on the railing with a cup of coffee, looking out at May's yard in the evening. He's trying, May said, handing her a plate. I know. You don't have to forgive him. I want you to know I know that. I know. Nora dried the plate and set it on the stack. My dad never said no to him, even when Leland didn't deserve it. I used to think that was a weakness. She paused. I understand it differently now. You can be angry at someone and still leave the door open. Those aren't the same choice. May handed her another plate without comment. Outside, Leland was still on the porch railing, cup in both hands, looking at something in the yard only he could see. On a Tuesday in September, the letter came. She found it in the mailbox on her way back from Earl's store, a white envelope tucked between a hardware catalog and a utility bill. The address written in handwriting that wasn't quite steady, not the unsteadiness of haste, the deliberate unsteadiness of a hand that had to work for what the mind asked it to do. Each letter formed with care, her name, her address, the effort visible in every stroke. She sat down on the front steps. Ranger sat beside her. The afternoon was warm, the clearing in full September light, the pale blue of the house bright in the sun. She opened the envelope carefully. The paper inside was a single sheet white, the lines tilting slightly in the way they tilt when a hand can no longer run level with the ease it once had. But the words were clear. Dear Nora, I read your letter 4 times. The nurses had to bring me tissues twice. And the second time Charlene, she has the night shift, sat with me for a while, which I didn't ask for, but was grateful for. She is a good woman. There are good people here. I'm still here. Room 214. They repainted the walls last spring, a color I didn't choose and wouldn't have, but the window looks out at a maple tree that has been turning since last week and is going to be extraordinary by the time you read this, if the timing works out. Still fighting. My hands are unreliable, but they have not given up entirely, and neither have I, and we proceed on that basis. Your father was the best man I ever knew. I have held that knowledge for 16 years since the day I left, and it has never become less true. It has only grown more expensive to carry, as true things about people you've lost tend to do. You sound just like him. I would very much like it if you wrote again. Whenever you're ready. No rush. I waited 15 years. I can wait a little longer. I love you. I have loved you every single day. Mom. Nora folded the letter along its original creases and held it with both hands. She was not going to Bristol today. She had known that even before the letter arrived, had settled into the knowledge the way you settle into a decision that is right, even when it requires patience. There was more to do here first. She needed to arrive at her mother's door as someone who had built something rather than someone still in the process of building. She thought Adeline would understand that distinction. But the door was open. It was open on both sides now, and that was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the last thing that had needed opening, and it was open, and the light was coming through it, and whatever came next could come through it too. She put the letter in her jacket pocket close to her body. She would put it in the back cover of the notebook tonight with the other two letters, the three of them together making a kind of correspondence across time, a conversation that had begun in grief and was slowly, imperfectly finding its way towards something else. She stood up. Ranger stood with her. The front door of the house was in front of her. The oak door she had stripped and sanded and finished its amber warmth visible even from the steps. She had the key on the ring in her pocket. She could hear from inside the box fan in the east window, on its low setting, the sound of the house breathing in the warm September afternoon. She went inside. Later in the early evening, when the light was long and gold through the east window, she sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open to a fresh page. She found the pencil, sat for a moment looking at the wall across from her, the wall Walt had framed and insulated and sheathed and drywalled the wall. She had painted the color he had chosen for her. The wall was just a wall. It was also everything he had meant. She wrote, September 14th, letter from Bristol. She's still there, still fighting. She says I sound like him. She stopped, looked at what she had written, then continued. The house is done, every room finished, door hung and locked. East window has curtains. Bathroom floor is blue tile, same pattern as page 17. Porch faces south. 2 chairs. She set the pencil down, then picked it up again and added one more line. He saw me. Every single day that he had. He saw me. She closed the notebook and put it on the shelf he had mounted at her height. She pushed her chair back and walked through the house one more time, the way you move through something when you want to carry the whole of it with you. The kitchen butcher block counter the window over the sink looking out at the tree line. The faucet ran hot and cold. The 2-burner gas range. Small but not small the way poverty is small. Small the way a thing is small when it has been designed for one person and that person has been thought about carefully. The bathroom blue tile on the floor, white walls, a shower that worked a mirror with a chip in the corner that she had come to prefer because it reminded her that useful and imperfect were not mutually exclusive. The finished bedroom, the east window with its white cotton curtains, the lamp on the shelf at her height, the notebook back in its place. The twin mattress with clean sheets. The room her father had finished first, had slept in every Saturday night for 7 years, had built before he built anything else, because he wanted her to have somewhere to land. The second bedroom pale blue wall she had painted herself empty and waiting. A room for whatever came next. The porch. She pushed the screen door open and stepped out, the cedar railing smooth under her palm. 3 solid steps. The 2 Adirondack chairs side by side facing south exactly as Walt had drawn them on page 11. Porch faces south, big enough for 2 chairs. She'll want a dog someday. She sat down in one of them. Ranger jumped the steps in a single movement and turned his 3 circles on the porch boards and settled with his head on her knee. She put her hand on his head. His fur had grown in thicker since spring, the ribs no longer visible. He had filled in as animals do when they have enough of what they need. The sun was going down behind the pines, turning the sky above the western tree line from gold to orange to a rose that had no name she knew. The clearing was in shadow, but the sky above it was still lit, and the pale blue of the house caught what remained of the light and held it. She thought about what May had told her once that Walt had said to her sitting right where Nora was sitting now. Some people build cathedrals. I'm just building my girl a place to come home to. And May had told him that was the same thing. Walt had never thought small of himself. He had thought specific. There was a difference. Some people want to change the world. Walt had wanted to change hers. She looked at the house, at the door she had stripped and finished, at the window boxes she'd built last week, still empty, waiting for fall planting. May had promised her bulbs. At the two chairs, the railing Leland had helped sand the steps he had come back to build. Her father had built the frame of this. She had completed it. The community had done the rest. Theron's plumbing inspection, Clem's electrical work, Earl's materials, and the job that paid for them. May's water heater and her Sunday dinners, and her steady presence. The curtains from the women at the church, the tile from the salvage yard, Leland steps and cedar railing. Walt had built the house alone, but she had not finished it alone. The difference mattered. She had come here with a nothing and had been met by a town that had known her father and chose one person at a time to extend that toward her. The stars were beginning to appear above the pines, more stars than she had ever seen from the apartment in Garner, where the parking lot light kept the sky perpetually half-lit. Here the sky was fully dark and fully itself. She had $47 in her pocket the day she stepped off the bus in Ridley. She'd had a backpack, a deed, and a Bible. Now she had a house, a job, a dog, a neighbor who felt like family, an uncle who was learning how to show up, and a mother 3 hours away in a room with a view of a maple tree waiting. She hadn't gotten any of it the way she expected. She'd gotten it the way Walt intended, the long way, the hard way, one board at a time. Ranger shifted on the porch and pressed closer against her leg. Outside in the grass, something moved small, unhurried, at home in the dark. The tree line stood in its patient row, the pines she had walked through the first day. The same pines she walked through every morning, now on the way to the gravel road and the 4 miles to town. She stayed on the porch until the last of the light was gone, and the clearing was fully dark, and the stars overhead were out in full. Then she stood and opened the screen door and went inside with the dog at her heels, and she turned off the kitchen light and turned down the lantern in the bedroom to just a glow, and she lay back on the mattress in the room her father had built. First of all, the room with the east window, and Ranger settled at the foot of the bed with his customary 3 circles and 1 decisive collapse, and the house was quiet around her, warm and complete, hers in every wall and floor and window and door. In the morning, the light would come through the east window and find her here. She would fix the trim on that window that her father definitely would have caught. She would write to Adeline again. She would open the front door with her own key and step onto the porch and sit in one of the 2 chairs facing south and drink her coffee while the clearing came into the day around her. Tomorrow was tomorrow. Tonight the house was done and she was in it, and outside in the dark the clearing was quiet and whole, and the pale blue walls stood solid in the starlight roof. Straight walls, true, not finished the way Walt had meant to finish it, but finished the way it needed to be. Which she understood now was the same thing. She closed her eyes. The east window held the dark. The stars moved overhead in their long, slow arcs, doing what they had always done, patient and indifferent and vast. The house breathed around her. Ranger breathed at the foot of the bed. And somewhere out in the clearing, the night made its quiet sounds, and the pines stood where they had always stood. And the land that had cost $340 at a county tax auction 7 years ago held all of it gently, the house and the dog and the girl, and the story of a man who had loved his daughter in the only language he knew how to speak, which was the language of wood and measure, and 7 years of Saturdays, in a window placed just so facing east, so that the morning light would find her first thing every day for the rest of her life. She had a morning light.